Let me show you the difference between King Saul and David right quick. You see, when Nathan came to David and explained to him his sin about taking Bathsheba, the way David responded was very simple. In 2 Samuel 12, verse 13, David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. When you look through that text, that's all David said. I have sinned against the Lord. He didn't expound any further. He didn't say, Nathan, I also sinned against you. He said, I have sinned against the Lord. And that's it. But when you look at 1 Samuel chapter 15, look at Saul and how he responded when the prophet Samuel came to him about his sin. In verse 24, Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin, return with me that I may worship the Lord. Now, he does mention sinning against the Lord, but he also says, and your word. So he's talking to Samuel uh, and saying, I sinned against your words in terms of Samuel's words. Then, if you go a little bit further in verse 30, he gives even more detail. He says, I have sinned, again, admitting that he sinned. And then he says, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me that I may worship the Lord. You see the difference? David just simply said, I have sinned. Saul mentioned in verse 24 that he sinned against Samuel's words in addition to the Lord. And then in verse 30, he asked Samuel to honor him before the elders of his people and before all of his kingdom. So he was focused not only on God's word, he was also focused on man's word and man's opinion and what people would think. I'll give you a little bit further detail into David's heart. In Psalm 51, verse 4, he says, well, verse 3, he says, For I acknowledge my transgressions and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight. You see the difference between Saul and David? David focused only on the fact that he sinned against God. Well, King Saul was worried about the fact that he sinned against other people. Now, you may think to yourself, well, yeah, David sinned against, Uriah and Bathsheba and really his whole nation because as king, this is a terrible thing for him to do. So you may think, yeah, David sinned against other people, but the difference is priority. God was David's only priority. You see, when God is our only priority, the other aspects of our lives, they just fall into place in terms of how we act and how we live in those other priorities of our lives. Those other priorities of our lives cannot be priorities because when God is our priority, He determines how we act. We determine how we act in line with his words and the commands of his words. You see, that's the difference between Saul and David. Saul was saying God was one of his priorities, people being the other. David was saying, God, you're my only priority. You see the difference? That doesn't mean that David didn't care about people and how he treated people. It means that the way his motives were aligned was only what God thinks. And when our motives are only aligned with what God thinks, then our actions are aligned with what God thinks. You want to study more about this? Please let us know. Give us a call at 843-553-5157 or email us at letthebiblespeak843 at gmail.com.